Have you ever trusted a coworker, believing you were on the same team, only to discover they were the ones stabbing you in the back? This is my story. A woman who thought she'd lost everything when falsely accused and fired from the job she loved. But sometimes, when you're pushed to your lowest point, the truth has a way of surfacing. And when it does, justice can be more powerful than any revenge you could have imagined. My name is Emily Parker, and at 32, I thought I had my life figured out. I worked as a financial analyst at Brightwave Solutions, a mid-sized tech company nestled in the heart of Denver. The glass building reflected the Rocky Mountains in the distance, a view I used to find inspiring every morning as I walked through those revolving doors with my coffee in hand. I wasn't the type to chase corner offices or six-figure bonuses. I loved the work itself, the satisfaction of balancing complex budgets, finding patterns in endless spreadsheets, and knowing that my analyses helped the company make smart decisions. My apartment was modest, my car was practical, and my biggest indulgence was the occasional weekend hike in the mountains. I believed that hard work and integrity would be enough. The office at Brightwave was like any modern American workplace, open floor plans that promised collaboration, but really just meant everyone could see everyone else's business. The air constantly hummed with keyboard clicks, hushed phone calls, and the occasional forced laughter from someone trying too hard to impress management. We had the usual cast of characters: the overachiever who sent emails at 2 a.m., the gossip who knew everyone's business, the burned-out middle manager counting days to retirement. But beneath the surface of casual Fridays and team-building exercises, there was something darker. Competition ran through the place like an electric current. Every quarter, when performance reviews came around, you could feel the tension ratchet up. People would suddenly guard their work more carefully. Conversations would stop when certain people walked by. And everyone kept mental scorecards of who got praised in meetings and who didn't. The KPIs were brutal. We weren't just expected to meet targets, we were expected to exceed them consistently. Missing your numbers once was a warning. Twice was a serious conversation. 3 times? You'd find your desk cleaned out while you were at lunch. I'd seen it happen to others. Good people who just had a bad quarter or made one wrong call on a market prediction. I survived by keeping my head down and letting my work speak for itself, while others played politics, schmoozing at happy hours and dropping names in conversations. I focused on delivering results. My reports were thorough, my projections were accurate, and I never missed a deadline. My supervisor, Janet, often said I was one of the most reliable people on the team. She'd sometimes pull me into special projects, the kind that had visibility all the way up to the C-suite. Looking back, that's probably where I made my first mistake. I didn't realize that being good at your job could make you a target. I didn't understand that in some people's minds, your success meant their failure. I was naive enough to believe that there was room for all of us to succeed. The break room conversations should have been my first warning. People would suddenly stop talking when I walked in, giving me those plastic smiles before hurrying back to their desks. I'd find myself mysteriously left off email chains for team lunches. Small things, really. Things I brushed off as office quirks or people being busy. I told myself I was there to work, not to win popularity contests. I had a few work friends, Sarah from IT, who'd help me with computer issues, Marcus from accounting, who shared my love of true crime podcasts. We'd grab lunch sometimes, complain about deadlines, share weekend plans, normal stuff. But in that environment, where everyone was watching everyone else, where one person's promotion meant another's stagnation, where layoff rumors circulated every few months like clockwork, normal didn't really exist. We were all just trying to survive, some more ruthlessly than others. I thought I was playing it safe by avoiding the politics, by just being good at my job. I thought competence and honesty would be enough armor against whatever corporate battles were being fought around me. I was wrong. David Miller joined our department 6 months after I did, transferring from the Chicago office with glowing recommendations. He had that easy charm that made people instantly comfortable, the kind of guy who remembered everyone's birthday, brought donuts on Fridays, and always had a funny story about his weekend. His desk was 3 spots down from mine, close enough that I could hear his confident phone voice as he worked through client calls. At first, I thought we'd be allies. David seemed genuinely interested in learning our Denver office's procedures, often stopping by my desk with questions about our reporting systems or client preferences. He'd lean against my cubicle wall, coffee in hand, flashing that disarming smile. "Emily, you're a lifesaver," he'd say. "I don't know what I'd do without your help." I was happy to help. That's what good colleagues did for each other, right? I shared my templates, walked him through our quarterly review process, even introduced him to key contacts in other departments. When Janet assigned us both to the Morrison Industries account, a major client worth millions in revenue, I saw it as an opportunity to show what teamwork could accomplish. But slowly, things began to shift. In meetings, David would present ideas that sounded eerily familiar, strategies I'd mentioned to him in casual conversation, approaches I'd been developing, but he'd phrase them just differently enough, deliver them with such confidence that they seemed fresh. When I'd try to build on his ideas with my own insights, he'd subtly redirect the conversation, making it seem like my additions were unnecessary complications. The first real red flag came during a presentation to the Morrison Industries executives. I'd spent weeks analyzing their cost structures, finding inefficiencies that could save them hundreds of thousands annually. David and I were supposed to present together. The night before, he texted saying he had food poisoning, asking if I could email him my slides so he could review them from home. The next morning, David walked in, looking perfectly healthy, armed with a revised presentation that incorporated all my analysis but restructured to highlight his contributions. When Janet complimented the thorough research, David graciously noted that it had been a team effort, but his tone suggested he was being modest about his own work. I sat there, stunned, as my weeks of late nights became his triumph. "You don't mind, do you?" he whispered to me during the break. "I just thought my format would resonate better with their corporate culture. We're a team, after all." The psychological games intensified from there. David had a talent for subtle manipulation that I only recognized in hindsight. He'd accidentally leave me off important emails, then act shocked when I wasn't prepared for discussions. "Oh, Emily, I'm so sorry. I thought you were copied. Here, let me forward it now." By then, of course, decisions had already been made. He started scheduling informal catch-ups with other team members during my lunch hour, building relationships while I was away. I'd return to find clusters of people around his desk, laughing at his stories, while giving me those awkward smiles when I passed. Sarah from IT mentioned that David had been asking about my work habits, framing it as concern. He said you seemed stressed lately, wondered if you were handling the workload okay. The whisper campaign was masterful. David never said anything directly negative about me. He was too smart for that. Instead, he'd express worry about my work-life balance, wonder aloud if I was maybe too detail-oriented for fast-paced projects, suggest that perhaps I wasn't comfortable with the collaborative culture at Brightwave. Seeds of doubt planted carefully in fertile ground. I started noticing changes in how others treated me. Colleagues who used to chat freely became professionally distant. Invitations to after-work drinks dried up. In meetings, my suggestions were met with polite but lukewarm responses, while David's virtually identical ideas minutes later would spark enthusiastic discussion. The isolation was deliberate and effective. When you're gradually excluded from the informal networks where real decisions get made, where information flows freely, you become vulnerable. You miss context, lose allies, and appear out of touch. David knew exactly what he was doing. I tried to push back, to reclaim my space. I scheduled one-on-ones with Janet to discuss my concerns, but David had gotten there first. "He mentioned you seemed to be struggling with the collaborative aspects of the Morrison account," she said, her expression sympathetic but distant. "Maybe we should adjust your responsibilities, give you more independent projects where you can shine." Independent projects. Code for less visible, less important work. The kind that wouldn't lead to promotions or raises. The kind that made you expendable when budget cuts came around. I remember the exact moment I realized this wasn't just professional competition. It was targeted destruction. David and I were both up for the same senior analyst position, a role that would come with a significant raise and direct report responsibilities. There could only be one winner. And David had decided that winner would be him, no matter what it took to get there. The trap was set on a Thursday afternoon in March. I remember because I'd just finished submitting the quarterly budget report, feeling proud of catching a $50,000 discrepancy that everyone else had missed. David stopped by my desk, friendlier than he'd been in weeks. "Great catch on that variance," he said, perching on the edge of my desk. "Hey, I'm swamped with the Morrison presentation. Could you help me reconcile some expense accounts? I'll owe you one." I should have seen it coming, but part of me still wanted to believe we could work together professionally. I agreed to help, and David gave me access to a shared folder with financial documents that needed review. What I didn't know was that he'd been planning this for months, creating fake invoices, doctoring approval signatures, and building a trail that would lead directly to me. Over the next 2 weeks, David carefully orchestrated his scheme. He'd ask me to review documents, make small corrections, update spreadsheets, all seemingly routine tasks. Each time, he made sure there were digital fingerprints, my login credentials accessing files, my email address on document histories, my employee ID on system logs. He even stayed late one night when I was working, bringing me coffee and chatting about weekend plans while ensuring security cameras caught us both at the office during the times when the fraudulent transactions were supposedly processed. The amount was significant, but not outrageous. $75,000 in fabricated vendor payments to a shell company. Enough to be serious fraud, but not so much that it would trigger automatic alerts from corporate. David had studied our systems, found the blind spots, and positioned me perfectly in them. On that Tuesday morning, I walked into the office to find Janet's assistant waiting by my desk. "Emily, they need you in conference room A, right away." Her face was carefully neutral, but I caught the sympathy in her eyes. She knew what was coming. The conference room felt like a tribunal. Janet sat at the head of the table, flanked by Martin Webb from Legal and Sandra Torres, our HR director. David was there too, sitting off to the side, his expression a perfect mask of concern and disappointment. A stack of documents lay on the table like evidence at a crime scene. "Emily, we need to discuss some serious discrepancies in the Morrison account," Martin began, his voice clinical. He slid a document across the table, a vendor payment authorization with what appeared to be my digital signature. "Can you explain this?" My blood turned to ice as I recognized the forged authorization. The vendor name was one I'd never seen, but the approval codes were mine. Or at least, they looked like mine. "I've never seen this before," I said, my voice shaking. "This isn't my authorization. I didn't approve this payment." Sandra pulled out another sheet. "Your login was used to access the system at 9:47 p.m. on March 15th. Security footage shows you were in the office. This transaction was processed at 9:52 p.m. I remembered that night. David had been there, working on Morrison materials. He'd brought me coffee. We'd talked about... Oh God. He'd been at my desk while I was in the bathroom. Just a few minutes, but enough time to use my logged-in computer. "David was there that night too," I said desperately. He could verify. I was in a different section of the office. David interrupted softly, his voice dripping with rehearsed regret. "I saw Emily working late, but I was focused on my own projects. I had no idea." He trailed off, shaking his head sadly. The meeting became a blur of accusations and evidence. Every document David showed them had been carefully crafted. Every explanation I offered sounded like desperate excuses. When I suggested they investigate David, pointing out how he'd benefited from my work, how he'd been undermining me, I saw the looks exchanged between them. I sounded paranoid, vindictive, trying to blame a colleague for my own crimes. "Emily," Janet finally said, and I knew from her tone that the decision had already been made. "The evidence is overwhelming. We're terminating your employment effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. This is a setup." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. David did this. Check his files, his communications. The company will pursue all appropriate legal remedies. Martin cut me off. I suggest you seek legal counsel. The walk to my desk was the longest of my life. Colleagues averted their eyes as security stood beside me while I packed my belongings into a cardboard box. My coffee mug with the funny quote about spreadsheets. The plant Sarah had given me for my birthday. 5 years of my life reduced to a box of trinkets. David was nowhere to be seen. But I felt his presence, his victory. As I was escorted to the elevator, I caught a glimpse of him through the conference room glass. Already in discussion with Janet, probably about taking over my responsibilities, my projects, my professional life. The elevator doors closed on my career, my reputation, and everything I'd worked to build. In less than an hour, I'd gone from a respected financial analyst to an accused embezzler. And the worst part? I knew David was probably already at my desk, settling into my chair, erasing every trace of what he'd done. The security guard took my badge at the lobby. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. He'd always been kind, remembering my name, chatting about the weather. I walked out into the Denver sunshine, carrying my box of belongings, my phone already buzzing with the email officially confirming my termination. Somewhere above me, in that glass tower, David Miller was probably accepting condolences from colleagues about having to work with a thief. He'd won. Or so he thought. The first week after my termination, I couldn't get out of bed. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. out of habit, reach for my phone to check emails, then remember, I didn't have a job anymore. The silence of my apartment was deafening. No meetings to prep for, no reports to review, no colleagues to coordinate with. Just me, staring at the ceiling, replaying that conference room ambush over and over. My savings account held enough for maybe 3 months of expenses if I was careful. The number stared back at me from my laptop screen, dropping every time I paid a bill. Rent, $1,800. Car payment, $350. Insurance, utilities, groceries. Each transaction a reminder that money was going out and nothing was coming in. I started applying for jobs immediately, polishing my resume, reaching out to recruiters. The first few calls were promising until they ran background checks. "I'm sorry, Ms. Parker, but we've decided to go with another candidate." The rejections were polite but firm. Word travels fast in Denver's financial sector. One recruiter, someone I'd worked with before, was honest enough to tell me the truth. "Emily, I'll be straight with you. Brightwave is telling references you were terminated for cause financial misconduct. Nobody's going to touch you with that hanging over your head." My professional network evaporated overnight. LinkedIn connections who used to engage with my posts went silent. Former colleagues didn't return my calls. Sarah from IT sent one text. "I'm so sorry. I can't be seen talking to you. I need this job." I understood, but it still hurt. My family tried to be supportive, but I could hear the doubt in their voices. My mother called daily, her tone carefully neutral as she asked if I needed money. My brother, a cop in Colorado Springs, was less subtle. Just tell me the truth. Did you do it? I won't judge, but I need to know." "I didn't do it, Michael. I was framed." The pause on his end said everything. Even my own family wasn't sure whether to believe me. The neighbors in my apartment building started whispering when I passed. The property manager, who'd always been friendly, became professionally distant. I overheard 2 residents in the laundry room. "She seems so normal. You never can tell about people." Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake calculating how long I could survive, running scenarios in my head. If I broke my lease, moved back with my parents in Minnesota, but that felt like admitting defeat. If I took minimum wage work. But who would hire someone accused of embezzlement to handle a cash register? I started drinking wine earlier in the day. Just 1 glass with lunch became 2, then 3. The bottles accumulated by my recycling bin. A shameful reminder of how I was coping. Or not coping. The worst part was the isolation. Humans aren't meant to be completely alone, cut off from purpose and community. I'd walk around downtown Denver, watching people in business clothes hurrying to meetings, living the life I used to have. I'd sit in coffee shops with my laptop, pretending to work, just to feel like I was still part of the professional world. 3 weeks into unemployment, I had a panic attack in a Whole Foods. The total came to $47.83, and I stood there calculating whether I could afford organic vegetables anymore. The cashier's impatient expression, the line building behind me, the fluorescent lights, it all crashed down. I abandoned my cart and ran to my car, hyperventilating in the parking lot while soccer moms loaded groceries around me. That night, I hit bottom. I sat on my bathroom floor at 2 a.m., wondering if this was my life now, unemployed, untrusted, unable to prove my innocence. David had won so completely that I almost admired the thoroughness of his destruction. He hadn't just taken my job, he'd taken my identity, my future, my faith in justice. I thought about giving up, moving to another state, changing careers entirely. Maybe teaching English abroad where no one would know about Brightwave or embezzlement charges. Start over completely. Let David have his victory. But then anger flared through the despair. Why should he get away with it? Why should I disappear quietly while he climbed the corporate ladder on the foundation of my destruction? He was probably sleeping soundly in his nice apartment while I rationed groceries and dodged calls from creditors. I pulled myself off that bathroom floor and opened my laptop. If the system had failed me, if Brightwave had chosen to believe David's lies, then I'd have to find another way. I started researching employment lawyers, reading about wrongful termination suits, understanding my rights. The first 3 lawyers I called wanted retainers I couldn't afford. The 4th said my case was too weak without concrete evidence. The 5th didn't even return my call. But I kept searching, fueled by a mixture of rage and determination that was the only thing keeping me from complete collapse. Then I found her website, Rachel Summers, Employment Law. Her bio mentioned she'd started her career at a big corporate firm before going solo to help employees fight back against corporate injustice. One line stood out: I believe everyone deserves their day in court, regardless of their ability to pay upfront. I sent her an email at 3 a.m., pouring out my story, attaching every document I'd managed to save before being locked out of Brightwave's systems. I explained I had limited funds but absolute conviction in my innocence. Her response came the next morning. Ms. Parker, I've reviewed your initial information. I'd like to meet. Are you free this afternoon? For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. Not quite hope. I'd learned not to trust that, but possibility. Maybe I couldn't get my old life back, but perhaps I could clear my name. Perhaps David Miller hadn't won after all. Perhaps this was just the beginning of the fight. Rachel Summers' office was nothing like the gleaming corporate law firms downtown, located in a converted Victorian house in Capitol Hill. It had exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and stacks of files that threatened to topple over. But her handshake was firm, her eyes sharp, and when she said, "Tell me everything," I knew I'd found my fighter. I talked for 2 hours straight while Rachel took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally interrupting with precise questions. When did David ask you to review those documents? Do you have the email? Did anyone else have access to your computer that night? When I finished, she leaned back, tapping her pen against her lips. Emily, I'll be honest, this is going to be tough. David did a thorough job, but he made mistakes. They always do when they're too clever. We just need to find them. Rachel worked on contingency, taking her fee from any settlement or judgment we might win. I believe you, she said simply. I've seen this before. Corporate narcissists who destroy others to climb the ladder. They're usually so proud of their schemes they leave breadcrumbs. We started with what I had. Emails I'd forwarded to my personal account, screenshots I'd taken of suspicious activities, dates and times I documented in my personal journal. It wasn't much, but Rachel treated each piece like potential gold. We'll request discovery, she explained. Force Brightwave to hand over all communications, all documents, all system logs. They'll resist, but that's what court orders are for. The first battle was just getting Brightwave to take us seriously. Their legal team responded to our initial filing with dismissive confidence, calling my claims baseless accusations from a disgruntled former employee attempting to deflect from her own criminal actions. But Rachel had dealt with corporate arrogance before. She filed motion after motion, demanding specific documents, depositions, electronic records. Each request was surgically precise, targeting potential weak points in David's story. Then came the intimidation. I started getting anonymous calls warning me to drop the case or face criminal prosecution. My car tires were slashed one night. Someone leaked to my apartment complex that I was under investigation for embezzlement, and I received an eviction notice. Rachel documented everything, adding harassment and defamation to our claims. "They're scared," she said, almost gleefully. This level of pushback means we're onto something. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus from accounting reached out through LinkedIn with a fake profile. "Can't talk openly," his message read, "but check David's expense reports from January. Compare signatures." Rachel subpoenaed 5 years of David's expense reports. What we found was subtle but damning. Variations in his signature style that matched the forgeries on my supposed authorizations. He'd practiced copying my signature by adapting his own. "It's not enough alone," Rachel said, "but it's a thread. Now we pull." We deposed Janet, who was clearly uncomfortable but stuck to the company line. Then Sandra from HR, who let slip that David had been the one to discover the fraud and bring it to management's attention. Convenient. The real victory came when we deposed Tyler, an IT specialist who'd left Brightwave a month after my termination. Away from the company's influence, he was more forthcoming. "Did you notice anything unusual about system access during the period in question?" Rachel asked. Tyler shifted nervously. "There were some anomalies, login patterns that didn't match typical user behavior." "Can you be more specific?" "Someone was logging in with Emily's credentials from IP addresses that traced back to different physical locations in the building, sometimes simultaneously." Rachel's eyes lit up. "How is that possible?" "Either Emily could be in 2 places at once, or someone had cloned her access credentials." David's team tried to block Tyler's testimony, claiming it was speculative, but the judge allowed it. We were building our case brick by brick, each piece of evidence adding weight to my innocence. Then Rachel found the smoking gun. Buried in thousands of pages of discovery documents was an email David had sent to his personal account 2 days before the fraud was discovered. It contained an attachment labeled "Insurance Policy." When opened, it was a detailed timeline of how to frame someone for embezzlement, written like a hypothetical scenario, but matching my situation exactly. "He was so arrogant," Rachel marveled. "He actually created a backup plan in case anyone questioned his story. He just never thought we'd find it." David tried to claim it was fiction writing, a creative exercise, but the specificity was damning. Names were changed, but details lined up perfectly: the amounts, the methods, even the timing. We also discovered David had done this before. Rachel's investigator found a former colleague from Chicago who'd been similarly pushed out under suspicious circumstances. She'd been too exhausted to fight back, but she was willing to testify about David's pattern of behavior. As our evidence mounted, Brightwave's legal team became less dismissive. Settlement offers started appearing, first insulting, then substantial. But I wasn't interested in being paid to go away quietly. "I want my day in court," I told Rachel. "I want everyone to know what he did." She smiled, the kind of smile a shark might give before feeding. "Then let's give them a show they'll never forget." The pre-trial hearings were brutal. Every aspect of my life was scrutinized, my character questioned, my motivations challenged. But Rachel was relentless, turning each attack back on David and Brightwave. She painted a picture of corporate negligence, of a company so eager to believe the worst about a female employee that they'd ignored obvious signs of deception. With each filing, each deposition, each piece of evidence we uncovered, I felt myself growing stronger. The woman who'd cried on her bathroom floor was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that justice wasn't given. It was taken, fought for, demanded. David's confidence was cracking. I saw him once outside the courthouse, and the easy charm was gone. He looked tired, older, diminished. Good. Ready for trial? Rachel asked as we prepared our final witness list. I thought about everything I'd lost: my job, my reputation, my savings, my sense of security. But I'd gained something too: the knowledge that I could survive being knocked down, that I could fight back. That truth mattered even when it seemed like lies had won. I've been ready since the day they escorted me out, I replied. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, more intimate, and therefore more intimidating. Every facial expression, every shift in posture would be visible to the jury. David sat at the defendant's table with his legal team, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He'd styled himself as the wronged party, the honest employee forced to expose a colleague's crimes. Rachel opened with controlled fire. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about betrayal, but not the kind you've been led to expect. This is about a man who orchestrated an elaborate scheme to destroy a colleague's career for his own advancement. David's lawyer, Harrison Pike, was everything you'd expect from a 500 per hour attorney. Silver-haired, distinguished, with a voice that suggested reasonable doubt was the only logical position. His opening painted me as a desperate woman who'd made a mistake and was now trying to blame an innocent colleague. The first day was procedural, setting the stage. But day 2, Rachel came out swinging. She called Tyler to the stand first. Mr. Chen, you worked in IT at Brightwave Solutions? Yes, for 3 years. Can you explain to the jury what you discovered about the login anomalies? Tyler pulled out his documentation, walking through the technical evidence in layman's terms. Emily Parker's credentials were used to access the system from 2 different locations simultaneously on multiple occasions. That's physically impossible, unless someone had cloned her access. Harrison tried to shake him on cross-examination, suggesting system glitches, but Tyler held firm. I've been doing this for 15 years. This wasn't a glitch. This was deliberate manipulation. Next came the forensic accountant Rachel had hired. She dissected the fraudulent transactions with surgical precision, showing how they'd been designed to look legitimate but contained subtle markers of fabrication. Real embezzlers try to hide their tracks, she explained. This was meant to be found, like a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to Ms. Parker. But the pivotal moment came when Rachel called David to the stand. He'd fought it, but the judge ruled he had to testify. David took the oath with practiced confidence, but I saw the slight tremor in his hand. Rachel started gently, almost conversationally. Mr. Miller, you discovered the fraud, correct? Unfortunately, yes. During a routine review. How fortunate that you happened to be reviewing those particular accounts. I was thorough in my work. Indeed. So thorough that you created a document detailing exactly how to frame someone for embezzlement. The courtroom went silent. Harrison objected, but Rachel had already introduced the email into evidence. She pulled it up on the screen. David's own words displayed for everyone to see. This is fiction, David insisted. A creative writing exercise. Fiction that exactly mirrors what happened to Ms. Parker, down to the amounts, the methods, the timing. David's charm was cracking. Coincidence. Rachel smiled, the expression sharp. Let's talk about Christine Walsh. David went pale. Christine was his former Chicago colleague, and she was sitting in the gallery, ready to testify. I don't know what you mean. The woman who was similarly accused of misconduct at your previous company, who was fired after you raised concerns. Another coincidence? Harrison's objections came fast and furious. But the damage was done. The jury was looking at David differently now. Rachel then produced the crown jewel. Security footage Tyler had recovered from a backup server. Footage that showed David at my computer during the crucial window when the fraudulent transactions were processed. Brightwave claimed the footage had been corrupted, but Tyler had found a cached copy. Can you explain? Rachel asked David. why you were at Ms. Parker's desk at 9:52 p.m. on March 15th, the exact time this transaction was authorized? David stammered about checking something, helping with a project. But his story kept changing. The smooth talker who'd destroyed my life was unraveling on the stand. The most powerful moment came when Rachel asked him directly, "Mr. Miller, did you frame Emily Parker?" "No," he said, but his voice cracked. "Did you destroy her career to advance your own?" "Absolutely not." "Then how do you explain the evidence, the document, the footage, the pattern of behavior?" David looked at his lawyers, then at the jury, then finally at me. For a second, I saw the real him, not the charming colleague or the confident manipulator, but a small, desperate man who'd built his success on others' destruction. "I plead the fifth," he said quietly. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. In legal dramas, pleading the fifth looks strategic. In real life, to a jury, it looks like guilt. Rachel's closing argument was masterful. She laid out the evidence like a story, showing how David had methodically planned my destruction, executed it with cold precision, and nearly gotten away with it. Emily Parker's only crime, she concluded, was being good at her job, so good that David Miller saw her as a threat. But instead of competing fairly, he chose to destroy her. Don't let him succeed. Harrison did his best in his closing, attacking inconsistencies, suggesting alternative interpretations, painting me as vindictive. But I could see the jury wasn't buying it anymore. As we waited for the verdict, Rachel squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens, you fought back. That takes courage." But I didn't want moral victories. I wanted vindication. I wanted my name cleared. I wanted David Miller to pay for what he'd done. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. 6 hours that felt like 6 years. When they finally returned, I could barely breathe. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The foreman stood, holding the paper that would determine my future. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, as he began to read. "We, the jury, find the defendant David Miller liable for defamation of character against the plaintiff Emily Parker." The words hit me like a physical force. Liable. He was liable. We further find the defendant liable for intentional infliction of emotional distress. My vision blurred with tears I'd been holding back for months. We find the defendant liable for tortious interference with business relations. Each verdict was another vindication, another confirmation that I hadn't been crazy, hadn't been paranoid, hadn't been lying. The judge continued. On the matter of damages, the jury awards the plaintiff Emily Parker compensatory damages in the amount of $450,000 for lost wages, damage to reputation, and emotional distress. $450,000, more than I dared hope for. Furthermore, due to the malicious and deliberate nature of the defendant's actions, the jury awards punitive damages in the amount of $2.1 million. The courtroom erupted. David's face went white as chalk. Harrison immediately started talking about appeals, but his client wasn't listening. David was staring at me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear in his eyes. Additionally, the judge continued, raising his voice over the noise, this court finds sufficient evidence of criminal fraud to refer this matter to the district attorney's office for potential prosecution. Criminal prosecution? David might not just lose money, he might lose his freedom. Rachel grabbed me in a fierce hug as the courtroom buzzed with reaction. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it." Brightwave's representatives looked sick. Their liability insurance would cover some of the damages, but their reputation was shattered. They'd have to explain to shareholders how they'd allowed this to happen, how they'd been so quick to believe David's lies without proper investigation. As we gathered our materials, Janet approached me. She looked older, tired, diminished. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I should have listened. I should have investigated more thoroughly." Part of me wanted to rage at her, to list every opportunity she'd had to seek the truth. but I was too exhausted for anger. Yes, I said simply. You should have. The media was waiting outside. Rachel had warned me this might happen. Wrongful termination cases rarely resulted in such substantial punitive damages. This would make news. Ms. Parker, how does it feel to be vindicated? A reporter called out. I thought about the months of isolation, the nights of despair, the systematic destruction of everything I'd built. Then I thought about David, who would now face his own destruction. Financial ruin, career obliteration, possible jail time. It feels like justice, I said. Rachel handled the rest of the questions while I stood there, feeling strangely empty. I'd expected triumph, but instead felt hollow. The verdict couldn't give me back the months I'd lost, couldn't erase the humiliation, couldn't restore my faith in the workplace I'd once loved. David pushed past us with his legal team, not making eye contact. But as he passed, I heard him mutter, "This isn't over." Rachel heard it too. "Yes, it is," she called after him. "Unless you want to add witness intimidation to your charges." That evening, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Former colleagues who'd shunned me suddenly wanted to reconnect. Recruiters who'd ignored my applications were eager to discuss opportunities. My brother called, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm so proud of you for fighting back." The money would take time to collect, appeals, negotiations, payment plans, but Rachel assured me we'd get every penny. Men like David always pay in the end. They can't help themselves. I returned to my apartment, the same one I'd nearly been evicted from, and sat in the silence. Tomorrow, I'd start rebuilding. I'd look for new work. Armed with a court verdict that proved my innocence. I'd reconnect with the people who mattered and forget the ones who'd abandoned me. I'd possibly even thank David, in a twisted way, for teaching me how strong I could be when pushed to the edge. But tonight, I opened a bottle of wine. Good wine, not the cheap stuff I'd been drinking during my despair, and toasted my reflection in the window. To Emily Parker, I said aloud, who refused to be destroyed. The city lights twinkled below, Denver continuing its relentless pace, indifferent to individual tragedies and triumphs. Somewhere out there, David was probably consulting with attorneys, planning appeals, scrambling to salvage something from the wreckage of his schemes. Let him scramble. Let him feel what I'd felt. The helplessness, the desperation, the isolation. The jury hadn't just awarded me money. They'd transferred my nightmare to him. Every dollar he'd have to pay was a reminder that his actions had consequences, that his victim had fought back and won. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Rest tonight, tomorrow. We make sure Brightwave implements new policies to prevent this from happening again. Your victory protects future employees." That's when it finally hit me. This wasn't just about me. Every person who'd been bullied, framed, or pushed out by a manipulative colleague had won a small victory today. David Miller had been exposed not just as a fraud, but as an example of what happens when corporate manipulation meets determined resistance. The wine tasted like vindication, each sip washing away another layer of the pain I'd carried. I wasn't the same Emily Parker who'd walked into Brightwave with naive optimism about meritocracy and fair play. I was harder now, warier, but also stronger. The judge had ordered David to pay. But what he'd really given me was worth more than money. The knowledge that truth, even when buried under elaborate lies, could still claw its way to the surface. That justice, while slow and painful, was possible. That sometimes the good guys actually win. 6 months after the verdict, I stood in front of another glass building, but this time with a very different feeling. I was walking into my new position as senior financial analyst at Morrison Consulting. Ironically, a firm that had worked with Brightwave until they'd severed ties after the trial became public. David Miller was serving 18 months in minimum security prison after the DA successfully prosecuted him for fraud. The criminal trial had revealed even more of his schemes, including kickbacks from vendors he'd hidden for years. Brightwave had conducted a full audit after my case, uncovering multiple instances of David's manipulation. 3 more former employees had come forward with similar stories, though none as extensively documented as mine. The financial settlement had given me security I'd never had before. After Rachel's contingency fee and taxes, I still had enough to buy a small condo in Denver, establish a robust emergency fund, and donate to a nonprofit that helped wrongfully terminated employees fight back. I'd even started a blog about workplace manipulation and gaslighting that had gained thousands of followers. People who'd experienced similar situations but hadn't known how to fight back. Janet had been demoted and eventually left Brightwave. Sandra from HR implemented new policies requiring multiple independent reviews for any termination involving financial accusations. The company stock had taken a hit, and they'd lost several major clients. Corporate karma, delivered with precision. But the real victory wasn't in David's downfall or Brightwave's struggles, it was in my transformation. The Emily who'd been escorted out with a cardboard box of belongings would have never imagined the Emily who now walked confidently into high-level meetings, who recognized manipulation tactics immediately, who mentored young professionals on protecting themselves from workplace predators. I'd learned that competence wasn't enough armor in the corporate world. You needed vigilance, documentation, and the willingness to fight when cornered. I kept meticulous records now, backed up everything to personal drives, and never fully trusted anyone who seemed too charming, too helpful, too interested in my work. Some might call that paranoid. I called it educated. The nightmares had finally stopped. For months after the trial, I'd wake up in cold sweats, dreaming I was back in that conference room, being accused again. But therapy had helped, as had the simple passage of time. The humiliation that had once felt like a permanent stain had faded to a battle scar, visible if you knew where to look, but no longer defining me. I'd run into David's ex-girlfriend at a coffee shop last month. She told me he'd lost everything. His savings went to legal fees and the settlement. His reputation was destroyed, and no company would touch him. He was working at his father's hardware store in Nebraska. A spectacular fall from the corporate heights he'd climbed on others' backs. "Do you feel sorry for him?" she'd asked. "No," I'd answered honestly. He made calculated choices to destroy my life for his gain. He's experiencing consequences, not injustice. My new office had a window view of the mountains, something I'd never had at Brightwave. Sometimes I'd stare at those peaks and think about how climbing them required patience, strength, and the ability to weather storms. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Rachel and I had become friends, meeting for wine occasionally to discuss her other cases. She'd used my verdict to help 3 other clients in similar situations. "You set precedent," she told me. "Your courage made their fights easier." That meant more than the money. Marcus from accounting had reached out after the trial, apologizing for not speaking up sooner. We grabbed coffee, and he told me about the toxic environment that had only gotten worse after I left. Until my trial exposed everything. "You didn't just win for yourself," he said. "You won for all of us who were too scared to fight." The truth was, I hadn't felt brave during any of it. I'd felt desperate, cornered, like a wounded animal with nothing left to lose. But sometimes that's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but action despite it. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Team meeting, 2 p.m. My new team. Where I was valued for my skills, not seen as a threat. Where collaboration meant actual collaboration, not hidden agendas and backstabbing. It wasn't perfect, no workplace ever is, but it was honest. As I gathered my materials for the meeting, I caught my reflection in my office window. The woman looking back wasn't the naive Emily who'd trusted too easily, nor the broken Emily who'd sobbed on a bathroom floor. This was Emily 3.0, rebuilt stronger, smarter, and absolutely unwilling to be anyone's victim. David Miller had taught me valuable lessons, though not the ones he'd intended. He'd shown me that evil sometimes wears a friendly face, that documentation is protection, that fighting back is possible even when the odds seem impossible. He'd tried to destroy me, but had instead forged me into someone indestructible. The meeting went well. My analysis was praised, my recommendations accepted, normal, professional, drama-free. Everything work should be. That evening, I stood on my condo balcony, looking out at the Denver skyline. The city that had once witnessed my humiliation had also witnessed my vindication. The glass buildings that had reflected my shame now reflected my triumph. I raised my wine glass to the sunset, thinking of everyone who'd been knocked down by a David Miller of their own. My story was proof that getting knocked down wasn't the end. It could be the beginning of something stronger. When you're pushed into the abyss, I said aloud, repeating the words I'd written in my blog that had resonated with so many readers. Remember, truth may take time, but it always finds its way back to the light. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of justice. Somewhere, David Miller was probably closing up his father's hardware store, living with the consequences of his choices. And here I was, not just surviving, but thriving. Proof that sometimes the underdog doesn't just fight back, sometimes they win everything. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm curious. Where in the world are you listening from? Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts or experiences. Have you ever faced a similar situation? How did you fight back? Let's build a community of survivors who refuse to be silenced.